lot of people in this room have thought a lot about, sort of the most cliched word, change. This is about the biggest change you can possibly imagine, a fundamental transformation. Now, one place that I've spoken that has, I think, captures this, though, in terms of the possibility of this change actually happening. If you've ever been down to the New Bedford Whaling Museum, they show a movie there called The City That Lit the World. And just ponder for a fact that within a couple of generations ago, we had such a radically different energy system. We were burning whale oil. We were burning wood. We were burning a little bit of coal. We were starting to burn petroleum. But frankly, the kind of radical change that is contemplated in these scenarios is exactly the kind of radical change we have actually made over the last 100 years. So, to indulge further in a, pandering cliche, yes, we can. And the chart that's all the way over on the farthest left is a range of changes to global temperature due to if we achieve that best case scenario. Now you notice that there are some lines going all the way up to the top, which is a global change of 4 degrees in average temperature. And that is assuming that we radically change our energy system in a very, very short order. That's saying there is still a very real chance that we will suffer tremendous effects from global warming, even if we really start to get our act together. Under that scenario, I have to say, global warming adaptation here in Dorchester, not up on a hill, means swimming lessons. And so we really need to grapple with that reality, that we have passed the point of no return in terms of doing harm. Our job, however, is to minimize the harm by starting to get our act together. And let's go on to the next slide here. And this is one of Ed Markey and Jim Hanson's favorite slides. It's a basic atmospheric chemistry illustration of the persistence of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere. Ed Markey likes to mention the fact that the CO2 that came out of the smokestack of the ship that brought his grandparents here from Ireland is still up in the atmosphere. It's really true. And if you are driving today, the CO2 that is being emitted by your car will, be about roughly 40% of it is still going to be in the atmosphere 100 years from now. It persists. It really does persist. So we're talking about a very cumulative business, and that's why part of the reasons why we need to start to get our act together. Now, to start to get much more specific about this in terms of what we actually need to do, on the next slide, this is something where I took the basically the sectors of the things that emit carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in our economy, and from the states that participate in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's basically the states from Maine to Delaware along the coast. And the brown line up at the top is the transportation sector. And we don't, frankly, think and talk enough about the transportation sector. And I'm going to continue that by not thinking or talking enough about the transportation sector. But it's really important to bear that in mind, that is, in many ways, a critical sector. The next line down, the blue one, you never know with PowerPoint how it's going to come up on the screen, but the next big line down is electricity generation. That is, if you treat electricity as a separate sector, there's a couple of different ways of breaking these things out, but this one treats electricity as its own sector. And, and then we start getting into heating and cooling of houses, of residential, commercial, and then industrial processes. That little line that begins dotted and then starts to go down is the budget for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that basically caps and then reduces CO2 emissions from power plants in those states. You'll notice it's actually above the electricity sector, which reflects two things. One, it reflects that the initial level is set too high. And I was present at the creation, so I'm willing to take some blame that we weren't able to turn the screws hard enough back then. And then it reflects the fact that it doesn't reduce it fast enough. But it's sort of the best tool we got going. one thing to just think about here. These curves, which obviously are not as sharp downward as the first one that I showed, basically assume that the best we're going to be able to do over the next 5 years is about 5% reduction. And if our goal is 80% reductions by 2050, if we do 5% every 5 years, that means that in 30 years, we're going to be having to make 25% reductions every 5 years. You know, now some of us are not anticipating still working 30 years from now, but anybody who was born in the year 2000, raise your hand. There's my daughter. You know, to somebody like my daughter over here who was born in the year 2000, 30 years from now, you know, that's not, that's, you know, sort of the prime of life. It should be. So we are telling the next generations that we are unable to get our act together, and they are going to have to be making, and I want you to think about that in terms of the challenge that we're presenting. This is not like some political problems, some policy problems where you solve the problem and then you move on. This is an enormous continuing issue.